Okay, thanks, Paul. And it's good to see you again. Good to see everybody again in, I guess, our fourth installment of this series, where we've been taking a look at the Implementing Data Mesh book and really diving into key topics, key chapters that we know we've had a lot of interest in and a lot of discussion around. Today, we're going to focus on data governance, and I think it's pretty exciting. My experience, I'm a data management professional for about 25, 30 years. I know Eric Broda from some collaboration we've been doing for the last decade or so, and I've recently met Jean-Georges Perrin, the other co-author of this book, and I've had a great time being a technical reviewer of the book and moderating these sessions. So I kind of want to get right into it and let the authors introduce themselves, and we'll get started with questions. And I've got a couple of questions already from a couple of data management groups that I'm participating in. But if you are the listener who have questions for either of the authors as it relates to data governance or anything related to the book, please don't hesitate to ask. And I'll be watching the chat to see those things come in. Okay, over to you guys. Who wants to go first? Introductions.
I can start this time. Oh, Jean George, you're probably on mute there, but how would I start? Eric Broda out of Toronto, Canada. 35 years experience in the industry, give or take. Executive at big banks and insurance companies. Last 7 years, 8 years now, run my own boutique consulting firm, working with large technology firms, big banks, insurance companies, and nonprofits to help them accelerate their data mesh journey. Obviously, I've written the book and about 23 other articles on medium.com around this topic.
And I just want to remind you, Eric, you fade out sometimes.
Oh,
So stay close to that mic. We love
got
hearing
it.
the end of your sentences. Sorry about the burn.
That's okay. I'll get you back later.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm Jean-Georges or JGP, depending on your level of French or Canadian French, it works as well. And I've I'm younger than Eric, obviously. We've got the same wisdom of beard, but I still have some hair. But in a few years, I'll reach this level of wisdom. Um, I recently joined a new company, and I am not at all talking on their behalf, and I'm just sharing my opinions here. So just to state that. And yeah, I've been implementing data mesh and advising people for the around data mesh for the last 3 years almost, I would say. Uh, my first book on data mesh was actually this one, which is really very easy to understand. And the second one is this one, which is a little bit more technical, um, a little bit more complex. But it was a great time writing with Eric. And as I said many times, what they say about Canadian is really true. They are nice people. So,
Well, I'd like to point out that I also resemble that remark. I'm also a Canadian, so I'm going to throw that out there. Uh, but well, great, guys. And I think it's always good to start with telling us a little bit about your inspiration for writing the book. I know you've talked about this a few times, but remind us why it was important. And if you want to relate it to today's topic around data governance, that's great. I would just like for people to hear what inspired each of you to get together and put this on paper and put this out in the world.
I can start. But Eric, and I think we've got a different answer every time we talk anyway. Um, Eric was writing quite a few articles on Medium. I had a popular post from when I was at PayPal on the topic, and naturally we met through the data mesh learning community, and our common friend Scott Ehrlichman and now Paul and all the gang there. and it made we were kind of chatting a little over a year ago, and saying, okay, well, we should do something together, okay, and that's how the idea of the book came along, and that's how the venture started. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take the second half of the question, I guess. Everybody knows Mac's original book, a beautiful work of art, full of principles, explaining how, what data mesh is supposed to do, and we explain how data mesh does it. So we provide the practices that accompany those principles. And that's what the book's actually about. We were hoping that we can provide practitioners some advice on how they would go about considering some of the architecture, design, planning decisions. Hopefully, we can also provide some advice for managers who have to actually grow and nurture an ecosystem of data products. And last but not least, but perhaps most importantly for today's discussion, for the governance professional, we have several chapters that key in on data mesh and how it actually enables with this whole notion of a boundary and a no accountable owner, and this whole delegated federated governance model. We think it also can apply directly to governance professionals who may be listening today.
Okay, well, good. That's a good setup. You know, the title is radically transforming data governance, and so I like that when you make bold statements. Data governance has been around for a long time. Uh, Give us a way to start to think about what's new with what you're proposing, and how does that relate to data governance and specifically data mesh.
Sure. I'll take a stab at this one here. I don't want to trivialize data governance as a crucial capability, obviously, but my definition may sound that way. It's not meant to. But I think governance, especially as it relates to data mesh and specifically data products, is you want to make sure that your data product does what it's expected to. And you want to be able to ensure that that data product is trustworthy. And I think that's kind of the simplest high level definition. And if you have that, then what you have is a well governed data product. And if you have that across the data product ecosystem, then you have a well governed data mesh. But there's a few key things that data mesh actually provides. As I mentioned earlier, data mesh fundamentally it's an ecosystem of data products. Every data product has a boundary. You can't govern anything without a clear boundary. So data mesh gives you that. Second thing is you can't govern things unless you can understand who's accountable for actually guiding the direction of a particular data product in our case. So data mesh gives you an owner. The second or third thing rather that it gives you is by virtue of having an owner, you have the opportunity to actually delegate authority for governance, for policies, data contracts, implementation, the publication, and the certification of a data product. You actually have the ability to formalize the delegation of governance. And I think that's the core superpower that data mesh and data products bring to the governance table.
I like your answer, and I'd love to ask Jean-Georges, JGP, how would you add to that or modify what Eric said there about the value?
I know you want us to fight, okay? But I'm not going to fight Eric on this one. But I'd like to add something there is that really, when we were building data mesh at PayPal, our best friends was enterprise data governance, because my experience with data governance is really to simplify it to an extreme is let's buy Colibra, install Colibra, and then we will have data governance. Okay. And I've seen that in many organizations. And I'm not criticizing Colibra. Okay. They are selling enterprise software and they're doing a pretty good job at it. But the thing is, it comes with a lot of practice, and a lot of companies are not ready for this practice. And I found that data products thinking implementing data product, and then going to data mesh is actually helping a lot with this practice, because people say, okay, you push it left or you push it right or whatever, but you actually push some level of effort to the people who know better, the owners, the users, the engineers. It's not by bringing a curator or a steward to your data, and the person doesn't know anything, that you're going to have data governance. For me, it's not a skill. It's not a function. It's a skill. Okay, and it should be part of everybody, and every people touching data, consumers, producers, owner, whatever, should be involved with data governance, and data mesh and data product enable that. That's really my very deep feeling, and about that. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I think you, I like both answers. Eric was talking about it allows us to establish a boundary, an owner, and delegate in a formal way how to establish trust, or how to formalize that governance. And you hit on something that I think is in addition to what he was saying, or in a similar way of saying it, is that it it almost makes it easier to understand the practice of data governance because you've got a known thing. I remember talking about data governance in 2008 when it was hot in financial services. We didn't have a thing. What are we governing? And the thing is the data product. So I think I hear both of you, and I hope others do too, because I think that allows them to say, "Here's what we're governing, and now let's talk about how practices and technologies can support that." So I'm
And,
really,
yeah,
yeah,
and to add a little bit to that part as well is, um, yeah, it was until data mesh, for a lot of people, it was a little bit abstract. Okay, as you said, it was um, bringing data mesh and data product, making it a little bit more realistic, like palpable almost, still try to touch my data, but anyway, uh, but uh, but I think it's becoming more real. But another big benefit of that is because you know better what the field knows. Okay, because whether you call it the domain, the field, or whatever, when you align your data product to the people that are actually going to use it, okay, use case, or practitioners, call them all you want, okay, or the factory floor I often use as an analogy. Uh, those people know better a lot, but they don't always know what things like HIPAA or RGPD or CCPA for you, John, in California, or whatever, those new regulations are kind of pushing on the data. So you still need a central enterprise level data governance that is actually designing and thinking the policies. Now, when they do that, it's easier to push the policies to the data products to implement them, right? And the specifics of the factory floor can actually be really adapted to that part. Okay. One example I use is that financial records in Australia have a retention period of 10 years. Okay. So if you're thinking about other countries where it's a little bit different and you're pushing that to everybody, then you're going to create a situation in a global organization where you're outlawed in Australia, which kind of being outlawed in Australia sounds kind of funny. But anyway, um, but that's yeah, I mean that's a situation. Okay, so this bi-directional channel is enabled also thanks to data mesh and its architecture. So
yeah. Okay, so I've got a couple other questions for the authors. However, if you're listening and you want to ask us anything as it relates to data mesh, data governance, please take a moment to ask your question and ask them ask us anything, as I always like to say. Uh, okay, so I've started with the question, and we've sort of talked about it a little bit. Um, do we want to share a little bit about the thinking that's in the book? And nobody's going to be able to see this diagram really, but I really like these life cycle diagrams you have, and many of the others. Do you want to talk a little bit about the thinking around data governance specific to what's in the book, and who wants to start to share some of the concepts from the book?
Well, I can let me get a few. I'm just trying to find the exact page in the book. It's page 176, believe it or not.
Yeah,
Um, there's a whole approach on data mesh or data product governance that is enabled by the fact that the data product owner has accountability, has a clear boundary, has delegated authority. And the model that we tried to use is something that's an analog in industry today. So I think everybody probably, if you were to look at your toaster or your wall outlet, you'd probably find something, at least in Canada, it says CSA, Canada Standards Organization. I think in the US it says Underwriters Laboratory, I believe, or something like that. And Europe has its own designation, as does Asia. Every region, every country has their own body that does that type of stuff. But what they do is it's an extreme version of delegated governance. And what I like to use a different word, because sometimes governance sounds like a four-letter word. It's not meant to be. It's crucial, but sometimes people associate it with a very procedural aspect. They should not. Okay, it is not, and they should not. But nevertheless, that's sometimes the perspective that people may have. So what we wanted to do was point to something that happens in the real world manufacturing governance, for example, as evidenced by the CSA or Underwriters Laboratory. And they go through a relatively intuitively simple process, but it's completely delegated. So yes, there's a CSA standard organization, but what their role is to do two things. First off, are there some global policies? And they work with experts. So, for toasters, probably what is the amount of amperage that can go through a thing or whatever. But they set up broad policies that should be applicable to all toasters. Okay. And then what they do is they actually identify when you have a product, you're trying to sell a toaster, you go through a governance process, effectively a certification process. So I like to call governance, especially as it relates to data mesh, a certification process. So each one of these toasters, again, when I say toaster, equate it to data product. These toasters, you have a toaster, there's a delegated body that says we're going to go third party assess your toaster. Does it actually meet the global standards and local standards and what have you? And then it doesn't have to be lengthy, but it's very in depth. And then they give you that stamp. They give you that brand of approval. That means that you can actually trust that toaster. On top of it, you can actually, if you wanted to, especially if there's something bad happens, lawyers or whatever, maybe need to get involved, they can actually go back and understand all the details of that certification to actually prove that it met the criteria. Same thing for data products. Because we now have an owner, like the product company, we have a data product, like the toaster. Okay. We have a federated governance mechanism, which simplistically says there's a body that sets the global parameter, whether it's privacy, security, or otherwise. But then, as Jean-Georges mentioned, we delegate the authority to those that know the data product best. So yes, it has to fit within some broad criteria, but we delegate the actual responsibility for governance and certification of the data product to the data product owner and their team, and as necessary, third-party professionals. When I say third-party, it doesn't have to be an external one. It could be another group, a governance group. But once that data product has actually been certified, okay, then then a consumer can confidently say that yes, that data product does what it's supposed to. It meets the consumption expectations. It adheres to the data contract, et cetera. And when feeds data comes in, you can confirm that part of the supply chain, like a supply chain, that the data coming in meets the contract and hence would be processed effectively. So the whole concept is about taking advantage of the fact that there's delegated ownership and delegated governance capability, combining that with the boundary, putting inside the boundary these things called data contracts, which from a business perspective, they hold, quality of service expectations, service level agreement expectations. At a technical level, they go down to like the fields. What's the metadata that's involved in the data transfer, the data consumption. But once those contracts are in place, they form policies, business policies as well as technical policies that the data product adheres to. And our certification process says, you know, we should be adhering to the policies. We should be verifying that the data product adheres to. We should be then publishing the status and then giving it effectively a certified brand to allow consumers to actually know, understand, and prove that the data product actually adheres to expectations. So there's a few key things. The supply chain that we have in the book actually talks about the fact that at any point in time, whether it's from product design all the way through packaging and distribution, the data contract reigns supreme. And I use data contracts in a general sense, probably closer to the BITAL definition that we'll ask Jean-Georges JDP to ask or talk about. But effectively, it covers a continuum of policies that that are codified in a way that you can actually hopefully automate the certification of those. So that's the whole concept. Jean-Georges, I know you're in the middle of all this with data contracts. You're kind of living and breathing it every day. What's your thoughts?
No, I think it's very close to that. I think you've got to standardize and you've got to make sure that when you're talking about the different artifacts like that, that they respond and they are behaving in an expected way. Okay, so that's why we also created the BTOL project at the Linux Foundation, where we want to normalize and standardize the data contracts on data products and eventually data mesh and their interactions, so that we can easily build stuff on top of them. So that's a little bit where what we're going, and I think this is perfectly in line with the idea of governance.
Yeah, and guys, I just want to point out that I might have directed anybody listening to the wrong page. I really think the crux of how what Eric was talking about starts on page 163, establishing data mesh governance. And there's a really good example of implementing data product certification, data contracts and certification. So just want to point people to the right place. And uh, can you explain just from from the beginning, how can you implement data product certification with with, and I don't want to make it purely technical, like not from the certify endpoint, but how do you sort of create or implement data contracts for certification? Just focus on that part of the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, JGP is the data contract wizard, so I'll let him go first on this one.
So I've got a bit of a I've got the the way I'm thinking about that is that we were talking a lot about data product governance and in the context of data mesh, but for me it starts at the level of the data contract, and it's something I explore in the book. I think it's chapter 5, 6, around there. But I'd like I'm evolving my line of thinking, and especially after my last conference in Tokyo, where I really think that the data products, and that's very technical, and I know you ask for a non-technical answer, but you'll get the technical answer.
Right.
And then we can drive from there. It's a bunch of data contracts and an SBOM. So Data contract, everybody knows what it is. SBOM is a little bit of a new term around the block. It's a software bill of material. And it's more and more required in terms of governance, actually, software governance. So when you're thinking this way, saying, okay, I've got my sets of data contracts that actually defining what's coming in my data product and what's coming out of the data product. And the way the data is either transformed, made available, stored, can be part of a software bill of material, an SBOM. And that could be this definition can be it could be a pipeline, but it could be an AI model. It could be a visualization if you wanted. We don't really care what you put, but the data contract itself becomes a container in which you put all these things. And it has standardized input and output, okay, so you can control all what's going on there. So when you start thinking like that, it gives us a set of artifacts that are YAML files or configuration files, which you can easily put in a GitHub, for example, or source control, okay? Then that's your first level of governance already, okay? You already know what's going on. You already have the change management in place. You already have all these things, okay? And this is based on the whole idea is to base that on standards once more, okay? So that you can imagine a future version of Colibra, for example, let's be hopeful, that can actually understand all these things and tell you what's going on, notify you, um, make sure that the process is following what the company or the organization wants, etc. Okay, but it only works if everybody kind of speaks the same language, right? Everybody on this conference right now speaks English. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit difficult for some. Um, same thing for data contracts, data product, software bill of material, etc. Okay, so that's really where I think we're going in terms of governance, and it's about certifying. How does it relate to the business? Well, that's how I can give it to Eric then.
Ah, oh, okay. So just to clarify the word you used, I heard it a few times, but you're talking about a S for software, BOM, BOM for bill of material. So you
Yeah,
used a new term, an S bomb. Okay, so that's what you're referring to. Okay,
exactly.
great.
I know. It's a little bit. The term is a little bit new, okay. But anyone that did Java,
Yeah,
it's a manifest file, okay.
yeah.
That's been around like since the 90s, okay. So let's just rename something that we all know with a fancy name, okay.
Yeah, and I don't hate it. I think that's uh we all have that tendency to want to capture all of that. So, Eric, please.
Yeah, just one quick thing that JGP highlighted I think is crucial. And I think everybody lives and breathes this every single day, but we all know that data is not static. It's changing every day, obviously, but also the format, the structure, the metadata is also changing. Not every day, but data has this life cycle and it changes. Now, the thing that this software bill of material gives you, especially if you're storing it in GitHub, uh, among other things, it would contain the metadata. And it would be that immutable record that shows you the structure of the data so you can actually read it over time. Maybe this is just going back to my old application developer days, but we would dread when the data model, the database implementation changed, a new field was coming because all the stuff before would work, but all the stuff before, maybe it's just we were bad coders, who knows? But the stuff before could not work. The stuff could not work with the data before the version change. This type of thing actually solves that problem. And this is, I think, one of the core technical aspects of governance is, again, if you take the thought around data should be trustworthy, that also means not only does it behave the way you want, but it also is reliable, resilient, and it will work tomorrow the way it does today. Well, this whole idea of versioning in GitHub gives you that immutable log of versions of your metadata. So the beautiful thing about this, and in my practice, we tend to use GitHub for a lot of different things. We store things in YAML files, but we get that first off, it's immutable. You can see the commit history and you can see what's changed, but you can actually go back to an old version. And if you're smart, you could actually use that to actually look at old versions of data and new versions of data. So the whole idea is it gives you that continuity over time. Now, where would this come into handy? Well, think about lineage. If you want to actually understand the lineage of your data, well, you want to see minimally, what's changed over time, and you want to go back to your record. So if you have it structured in YAML, okay, in a standard what type of format, and if you have it structured in GitHub, stored in GitHub, you can actually see versions of your DDL, your database structure, which is crucial, as I mentioned, to some obviously it's not necessarily the core aspect of governance, but it's one of those things that you need to really think through.
I want to pick up,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I want to add something to that, okay,
yes,
John.
please.
Okay, you're the moderator, but let's moderate you. Um, uh, when in this context, okay, when you're thinking about data, a lot of people are thinking about, oh, what's my source of truth? Okay. And Eric mentioned lineage, et cetera, et cetera. But with the data contract and the data product this way, you're actually creating your source of truth for your metadata. Because right now, where is your source of truth for your metadata? And you may say, oh, I don't care. But actually, when you're an application developer, as Eric mentioned, you do care. And you want to know where is the real representation of the schema, not that the guy that is going to change it tomorrow without warning anyone. Okay. And then the thing is, it breaks everything, et cetera, et cetera. We've all been through this kind of scenarios in our career. But the thing is, that's why the data contract is enabling the source of truth for your metadata.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because, and I'm glad you moderated me.
Right.
To but no, I think that's really good. On a conversation we had a couple of talks ago, somebody asked a really great question about, okay, well, I hear you, and they said, teach me how to organize my repos across the enterprise. If what you're saying is true, you remember this question that came up. Do you have one repo for all of your met? And it seems like you're centralizing. Or how do you think about if if the contract sitting in a repo is the source of truth? Tell me more about how you think about structuring those or separating those or tackling that question about the where do I physically instantiate that contract in which repo and how should I think about that?
I think it should be next to all your other artifacts. Okay, that's the I'm not I don't think there's going to be a central repo where you're going to have all your data contracts. Or if you do that, it's going to be a replica or a copy or something. But I would keep the data contract where they're going to be used. Okay, if it's to if it's close to a data pipeline, you may need one before at the entrance of your pipeline and one at the output of your data pipeline. Then these two should be next to your DBT code that is actually doing your data contract or your Perl code. Okay, I don't care. So that's where I think it should be. Otherwise, you will have some synchronization problems and rights problems on different repos, et cetera, et cetera. So, but really, I'm not enforcing this. I think it's it's a good practice, but I don't want to say, hey, that's the only way, right? It depends how your organization is organized. I've seen everybody's seen horror stories of GitHub with too many things inside.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. I think the key takeaway that everybody should hear because data people don't data engineers typically don't think the way software engineers think. There's a few differences. And a software engineer would co-locate the code in the same repo that the pipeline would be. That a software engineer would do that, a data engineer. You know who might not is a data governance person who has less technical knowledge and might say, well, I need a central repo for all of this. And I think what we've learned as engineers is that it's got to be co-located with the code that is relevant. And how you choose to expose that, whether you replicate it into a central place or other techniques, that's up to you. But I know that's not the only thing. I know Eric has a strong point of view on that, or did you want to add anything to that or
No,
clarify?
no, well, I think, yeah, just to add an echo, perhaps, I believe, let's just assume you store these things in GitHub. Um, I believe strongly that the contract should be close in the same repo as the code. Now, the question that you highlighted, as a governance professional, I want to have a global view. But we shouldn't confuse the fact that I have a catalog that can link to the stuff wherever it resides and provide that unified view, a search capability, whatever you may need as a governance professional. But what it does is it's pointing back to the book of record, which is the contract is associated with the code that manages it. The reason that's so important now that if you're not thinking data mesh, that might just be a game time decision, if you will. What data mesh and data products say is we have a boundary, we have an owner. Okay. Why don't we, well, in delegated authority, why don't we actually add the artifacts right to the data and make both of them the accountability of the owner? And that's where I think the logic comes in for why this, would be a data mesh or a data product approach.
Good. Now, I see we got a question from D. And again, feel free to ask questions, folks. They don't have to follow the technical train of thought that we were just going down or, ask us anything. So this one's from D, and it's a long one. So how do we, as data people and data management professionals, how do we communicate concisely with executive leadership or other team members who may not speak the language of data? How to build our teams and prioritize what we require? So they're really asking, how do we communicate concisely so that we can get meaningful support? So that's the question. Who wants to start?
I can start there. I think more, I think it's more communication questions than even the technical questions, but with these new concepts, it's important to be able to explain them. I think you have to adapt to your to the person you're going to talk to. Okay, so and it's probably not going to be the same language you're going to use with your leadership rather than with data engineers. Okay, especially if you're trying to convince them of leveraging data product or using data products. Okay, so may I point again to this little book, which is really ideal for your leadership, because they really it's easy to understand. It's big letters, very colorful, and it helps. Okay, it really helps. Okay, so like it's anyway. And I'm half joking with it, because the thing is, they took numbers, they took return on investments, they took initial investments, they took risks. Okay, which usually data engineers are not very familiar with. Okay, so if you're in your position as being like a senior data engineer, becoming an architect, or becoming a team leader, and you've got to start flushing these things, be concise, use their language, use what they want to hear, ask questions, understand their problems. Okay, so that's towards your leadership. towards your team, it might be a little bit more technical. Okay. Um, Data engineers and software engineers, they believe in engineering, in engineering stuff. Okay. So don't hesitate to show code. Okay. Hey, a data contract, that's not that difficult to write. Okay. It's a bunch of YAML files, in bunch of entries in a YAML file. You don't have to create the whole thing. You've got tools to pre-populate, and that's probably a sessions we're going to do in the future, and just teasing. And you get around very quickly. Okay, it's not going to be something that is completely revolutionizing your work. So you've got everybody, everybody, I would say in the engineering, they are afraid of changes. They are afraid of losing their job. They are afraid of having something, an additional work to do, an additional task to do. Okay, so at PayPal, when we said, hey, let's do data contracts. They said, oh, we've got to do this thing, but it's going to add more work. And even if it adds more work, okay, the thing is you plan according to it. Okay, so it means that a story that used to be 5 points is becoming 8, for example. But the thing is, it's not, but we've got also to remove things. So when we said, hey, you are not going, you're doing data contracts, but you don't have to do documentation, because the documentation is part of the data contract, and we're going to extract it to build something intelligible for your user. So that it's a win-win. Okay, it's so that's I think how you kind of convince your stakeholders, to to adopt your thing, and it takes time. There's a lot of things you've got to do to convince them, to explain to them, to adapt your discussion. I see a lot of Confluence pages for people. They are all very ugly, and they are all very, I don't want to read this thing. Okay. In most companies, I've so you've got to make it, you've got to make it fun. Okay, you've got to use little diagrams. You've got to use fun stuff. You've got to use videos. Okay, so you've got to be creative, and that's not especially our skill set. Okay, so get out of your comfort zone.
Well,
Would you
so let me,
Yeah, please go ahead.
yeah. So, so I think earlier Jean-Georges or John mentioned that it's good that we're all speaking the same language, and that's why we can understand each other. The fact of the matter, I think when you look at different levels in the organization, they talk a different language. So as an executive, I'm thinking about outcomes and priorities, time to market, revenue, that type of stuff. As a project manager, I may think of roadmaps and tasks that need to get done. As an engineer, I'm probably thinking about what platform am I actually running. If I'm a consumer of data products, I'm probably talking, about the data contracts. If I'm a finance professional, I'm probably talking about dollars and cents and investments, and do I have the budget? But here's the interesting thing, and where data mesh comes in, is the responsibility for communicating that resides with the data product team. Now, are we throwing too much into the responsibility of the data product owner and the data product team? I would argue no. I would suggest that the most successful data product teams, data product owners, and data products are those that link directly to a business outcome, and they match to the organization or the executive's priority. And they're communicated in a way with benefits that resonate to the executive. In other words, you're fulfilling a need that they actually have. And I could go down the list. As a project manager, program manager, the data product owner has to provide that roadmap that says, here's how I'm going to build the first one. Here's how it may evolve over the next little while. As an engineer, the data product team needs to say, this is my database product. We're putting it on the cloud, and here's kind of the structure of the data that I want to actually have in there. Again, the data product team needs to be conversant. In other words, they kind of need to be like my wife, where she can speak English, a little bit of French, and she's learning Spanish, because those are the people that she talks to on a regular basis or wants to talk to. As a data product team, we need to be kind of like that. We need to actually talk the language of the people that we want to influence or that we want to work with. And it's actually that simple. And the closer that we can move to that audience, in particular, by the way, the executive audience, the closer to outcomes, and the better we can talk about how our data product fulfills some of those outcomes, that's when we actually have a successful data product. That's when we'll have a successful governance team.
Thanks, guys. And sorry if there's some background noise distracting here, but we get this question a lot in every one of these sessions, which is, okay, guys, this is great, but how do I get started? And a lot of customers are not at the latest tech company or have been asked to come in and transform their business with data mesh. So how do you help people get started, especially if they want to start to move towards this uh, data governance approach you're talking about?
I'll take a stab at this one first. Uh, First off, when you start down the data mesh journey, you're not actually building a data mesh. You're building your first data product. And that data product hopefully fulfills a specific need, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. So you're building that very first data product. And if you can actually deliver that successfully, you are on the path. You have the wind at your back. You have the momentum. You're on the path to success. The very first step in creating that first data product is to find the business outcome, obviously the sponsor, but then you need to define the boundary and the scope. Sounds relatively easy. It's not as easy as you think, but that's a logical first step. Once you have that, you need to figure out who that owner is. Hopefully somebody very close to the data and has the ability to speak the language of the business. You're going to want to build your MVP, minimum viable product. What is that first lean and mean data product that actually goes into production where I can actually learn how that DevSecOps capability will actually work? And then how do I actually identify and confirm and to be honest with you, publicize and advertise the success that that MVP has? That first data product is crucial. Now, that first data product is also the vehicle for you, as I mentioned, to test the DevSecOps process, yes, but also to test your governance capability. Do I have the basic data contracts in place? And can I actually, validate that I'm adhering to those? So maybe I build some scripts and some capability. And then how do I publish it? What are the interfaces that I actually need? Maybe I put it in the data product. I have a set of, APIs that one of which is the /certify endpoint. How does anybody actually query the governance status of my data product? But the first data product is where you're going to be putting the governance training wheels on, so that you can actually do it successfully as you go forward, and then hopefully ride your bike, your governance bike at 100 kilometers an hour. I don't know if that's safe,
And
but
yeah,
you know what I mean.
and I know next session's topic is really about establishing a data mesh roadmap. So we'll talk about that in a lot more detail next time. But I appreciate you taking that question. Now, Anuj asked a good question about the previous topic we just had. He was asking, when I search for a data contract in a data marketplace or a data catalog, will it return the corresponding endpoint from a relevant data product, or will it actually hit that endpoint internally, returning the output as a proxy? So this is a very good question, it's a question I particularly like. You guys want to talk about that, how you're thinking about that?
So the way I implemented it is that your data catalog is as a copy of your data contracts on your different artifacts. And it's not actually going to ask the data product. Okay. In the book, there's this illustration I used already last time, and I should have actually posted it on the page with the different planes. And for me, you've got the data product at the product experience plane. You've got a lower level, a lower a plane, which is the infrastructure plane, and you've got a higher plane, which is the data mesh experience plane, and that was really coming from directly from Jean-Marc. Uh, what what it's fitting is that yes, a source of truth once more for your data product, etc., is probably associated to your data product experience plane. But what is actually shown as a result of a query on the data catalog is something that the data catalog understands. Okay, so it's an artifact that may eventually be transformed. In the case, for example, of Colibra, I keep mentioning them, but I don't have any stake there. But or let's say Infosphere data governance, okay, you're preparing the artifact or actual data. You're preparing the artifact that is actually expected by the system. Okay, so because naturally they don't yet understand things like ODCS or ODPS. So so that's why. Then nothing forbids you to have an extension that is going when you're displaying to your user that is going to query the data product itself to make sure that it's available, that it has active metadata. We didn't talk much about active metadata, that um, that it still has the same the same version, etc. Okay, so my vision of it is also that the data product, when there's an update, it's actually being published on a Kafka topic, and then the Kafka topic, if you want to talk gore, okay, then there's a subscriber on the data on the Kafka topic that is actually taking the data contracts, the ODPS, ODCS files, and then inserting them into the data catalog. Okay, so I hope that answers
Yeah,
question.
well, that was a really good explanation, and it reminds me how, if you haven't read the book yet, chapter 7 around aligning with the experience planes is one of the things JJP was just, yeah, no, I love that diagram that you were just pointing out, and I think it's a helpful way to separate, into three different planes. So I think that was good. And um, Eric, did you want to add anything to that discussion?
Yeah, I know we only have a few minutes left, and but I'll be very quick. Ultimately, if you want to find things, there has to be a catalog. I call it a marketplace. There's a subtle difference between the two. Probably too much for this discussion here, but there's two ways a catalog can work. One is you can copy the stuff up to the catalog, and it becomes a book of reference. Maybe not the book of record, obviously. So you get the stuff from the GitHub repos, your contracts, and you push them up. Most catalogs, I shouldn't say most, many catalogs function that way. And if the stuff isn't changing too rapidly or too frequently, that probably works quite well. However, in the data with data mesh and the delegated owner of the boundary, you have an opportunity to make the data product smart, for lack of a better word. It can have its own interfaces. Maybe it has a /search interface. Okay, which means the marketplace actually, queries the actual data products for metadata. Um, so that's option number one is the marketplace is able to search through some really basic names, functionality, and then actually it has a URL that points to the actual data product capability. One of them may be the /discover endpoint, which returns all the contracts. The second approach says, why don't I just go to GitHub? And the marketplace can actually go to GitHub and get its data contract. So that's the other way, assuming that GitHub is, for example, your book of record, a very viable and practical approach. So there's kind of three approaches that you can actually use from an implementation perspective. There's different criteria that would suggest one is best suited than perhaps the other. But there's several options, and I think we cover each of those in the book in various different chapters.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the question, Anuj. I know that it comes up quite a bit, and you can see different product vendors made different choices when they started. So if you look at the various catalog marketplace, they all have a different philosophy on that and where and how they do caching. So it's a good conversation that I'd love to continue. But thanks for the question. I see we've only got 2 minutes left. I really know we've got a hard stop, so I just want to give both authors a chance to summarize or wrap up with any thoughts they have on today's topic before we run out of time.
Yeah, I will conclude and then I will leave. I'm sorry, I've got a very hard stop. Um, I think it's clear that governance is not the most, you know, sexy topic to talk about, but it can be really passionating and it can help users. Okay, and I a lot of people think governance is here to annoy people. I think really the opposite. So I'm really encourage you to look at it from a different perspective and knowing that data mesh can actually help as well.
Yeah, I'll be very brief too. I think I would look at data meshes and data products giving you a new tool in your tool belt. Under certain circumstances, especially if you're on your data mesh and data product journey, will be ideally suited. So I'm hoping that we provided another tool in your tool belt to help you be successful.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I just want to thank you. We will wrap up 1 minute early. And Paul, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I just want to say make sure to come back in a couple more weeks on the 20th for establishing a roadmap for data products, data contracts. So yeah, we'll be back in exactly 2 weeks at 10 a.m. Pacific time.
Perfect. Be well, everyone.
All right.
Bye now.
Thanks, Better. Bye.